I'm Ramiro, 19 years old, and a first-year college student who never thought my mother would kick me out of our home, all because I refused to share my college fund with my step-siblings. The fund my grandparents specifically set up for me since birth. My mom remarried when I was 15, bringing 2 kids into our lives. I'm about to share something that changed my entire family dynamic. If you're watching this, drop a comment letting me know where you're from, and subscribe to hear more stories about standing your ground when everyone expects you to cave. Before everything fell apart, we were the perfect little family of 3. My mom, my dad, and me. We lived in a modest 3-bedroom house in a quiet suburb of Chicago. My dad worked as an engineer for a construction company, and my mom was an elementary school teacher. We weren't rich, but we had everything we needed. And most importantly, we had each other. Every weekend, Dad would take me fishing at the local lake or teach me how to fix things around the house. Mom would bake cookies with me and help with my homework. Those were simple times, but they were filled with love and laughter. I remember how Dad would swing me around in the backyard until I was dizzy with joy, and how Mom would read me stories before bed, doing all the character voices that made me giggle uncontrollably. Then came that rainy Tuesday in October 7 years ago. I was 12 years old when the police officers showed up at our door. Mom collapsed when they told her that Dad had been killed in a car accident. A drunk driver had crossed the center line and hit him head-on. Just like that, our perfect little world shattered into a million pieces. The days that followed were a blur of tears and black clothes. I remember standing at the funeral holding Mom's hand as she sobbed uncontrollably. I didn't fully understand the permanence of death then, but I knew enough to realize that Dad wasn't coming back. My paternal grandparents, Grandpa Robert and Grandma Elaine, were devastated too. Dad was their only child, and losing him nearly destroyed them. But somehow through their grief, they found the strength to be there for Mom and me. They lived just 30 minutes away from us, and after Dad's death, they started visiting more frequently. Grandpa Robert was a retired lawyer with a kind face and strong hands that always smelled faintly of pipe tobacco. Grandma Elaine was a former librarian who made the best apple pie in 3 counties. They had always doted on me, their only grandchild. But after Dad died, their attention became even more focused. I didn't know it then, but Grandpa and Grandma had set up a college fund for me the day I was born. Dad had always emphasized the importance of education, and his parents shared that value. They had been adding to it consistently for 12 years, ensuring that when the time came, I would have the opportunity to attend a good university without the burden of crushing student loans. The bond I shared with my grandparents was special. Grandpa would take me fishing just like Dad used to, teaching me patience and perseverance. "The fish will bite when they're ready, Ramiro," he'd say. "You can't rush nature." Grandma taught me how to cook traditional family recipes and told me stories about Dad when he was my age. "Your father was just as stubborn as you are," she'd laugh, ruffling my hair. Mom struggled in the aftermath of Dad's death. She took a leave of absence from teaching and spent most days in bed curtains drawn against the sunlight. I did my best to help around the house, making simple meals and doing laundry, but I was just a kid trying to navigate my own grief. Gradually, over the next 2 years, Mom started to emerge from her depression. She returned to teaching, started socializing again, and even laughed occasionally. I was 14 when she told me she had met someone. His name was Keith, a financial advisor she had met at a school fundraising event. "He makes me happy, Ramiro," she said, her eyes bright for the first time in years. "I think you'll like him." I wanted to be happy for her. I really did. But something inside me recoiled at the thought of someone taking Dad's place. Still, I nodded and forced a smile because I loved my mom and wanted her to be happy again. Keith was tall with thinning brown hair and a booming laugh. He was 40 years old, 5 years older than Mom, and had 2 children from his previous marriage, Ashley 13 and Jason 11. Our first meeting was at a restaurant, awkward and stilted. Keith tried too hard, laughing too loudly at his own jokes. Ashley barely looked up from her phone, and Jason kept kicking the table leg, rhythmically sending vibrations through my soda. "So Ramiro, your mom tells me you're quite the baseball player," Keith said, attempting to find common ground. "I play sometimes," I replied, even though I hadn't picked up a bat since Dad died. Baseball had been our thing. As the months passed, Keith became a regular fixture in our lives. He would come over for dinner several times a week, sometimes bringing Ashley and Jason along. I tried to be polite, but I couldn't shake the feeling that our family dynamic was being disrupted. Mom seemed different around Keith, more concerned with impressing him than noticing my discomfort. Meanwhile, I spent more time at Grandpa and Grandma's house, finding solace in their unchanged affection and the familiar stories about Dad. They never pushed me to talk about Keith or the changes at home, but they listened when I needed to vent. "Your mom deserves to be happy," Ramiro Grandma would say gently. "But so do you. Your feelings are valid too." I knew she was right. But as Keith's presence in our lives grew stronger, I couldn't help feeling like I was losing not only the memory of my dad, but also the connection I once shared with my mom. She was slipping away from me, focused on building a new life that I wasn't sure I wanted to be part of. Mom and Keith got married when I was 15, just over 3 years after Dad died. The wedding was small, held in the backyard of our house, with only close family and friends in attendance. I wore an uncomfortable suit and stood beside Mom during the ceremony, trying to look happy for her sake. But inside, I felt a profound sense of loss, as if this marriage was the final nail in the coffin of our old life. Grandpa and Grandma came to the wedding, of course. They hugged Mom and shook Keith's hand, ever gracious, despite their own complicated feelings. I caught Grandpa's eye during the reception, and he gave me a subtle nod of understanding. That small gesture meant everything to me. Within a month of the wedding, our household expanded. Ashley and Jason moved in, bringing with them boxes of belongings and entirely new routines. Our once peaceful home became chaotic and crowded. The bathroom I had always used alone now had to be shared with Jason, whose concept of cleanliness differed wildly from mine. "We need to reorganize the sleeping arrangements," Keith announced one evening at dinner. "The kids need their own spaces." What he meant was that I needed to give up my room. Our house had 3 bedrooms: the master bedroom for Mom and Keith, my room, and the guest room that had once been Dad's home office. Logic dictated that Ashley, being the only girl, should get her own room, which meant I would be sharing with Jason. "It's only temporary," Mom assured me as I reluctantly moved my things into what was now our room. "Keith is looking into bigger houses for next year." But I knew from the way Keith talked about property values and market conditions that a move wasn't actually on the horizon. This was my new reality. Half a room, half a bathroom, half the attention from my mother. Jason was a decent kid, but we had nothing in common. He was obsessed with video games and played them at all hours, the glow of his screen keeping me awake at night. He left dirty clothes on the floor and food wrappers between the couch cushions. When I asked him to clean up after himself, he would shrug and say, "You're not my dad," before continuing whatever he was doing. Keith brought new rules into the house as well. Dinner was now served precisely at 6:30. Everyone had chores assigned on a rotating schedule. Screen time was limited on weekdays. None of these rules were unreasonable, but they felt like impositions in what had once been my home. "In this family, we follow structure," Keith would say, whenever I questioned one of his edicts. "Structure builds character." The word family started to grate on me. We weren't a family. We were 5 people forced together by circumstance and my mother's choices. Mom changed too. She began deferring to Keith on decisions that she would have previously made herself. She spent more time helping Ashley with her social studies projects or taking Jason to soccer practice than checking in on my schoolwork or attending my debate team competitions. One particularly painful moment came when I qualified for the state debate championship. The competition fell on the same weekend as Ashley's dance recital. "I'm sorry, Ramiro," Mom said, genuine regret in her eyes. "But we already promised Ashley we'd all be there for her big solo. Grandma and Grandpa can take you to your debate, right?" Of course they could, and they did. They sat in the front row cheering loudly when I took second place overall. But the empty seat where my mother should have been spoke volumes. Home no longer felt like home. I found myself retreating to my side of the shared bedroom, headphones on, to drown out the noise of a household that seemed to function perfectly well without me. Keith's children became the center of attention, their needs and wants prioritized over mine. "You need to make more of an effort," Ramiro, Mom said, during one of our increasingly rare moments alone. "Keith and I worry that you're isolating yourself." What she didn't understand was that I wasn't isolating myself. I was being isolated by their new family dynamic. Grandpa and Grandma became my sanctuary. Every weekend I would bike to their house, sometimes staying overnight. Their home remained unchanged, A museum of memories with photos of Dad still prominently displayed on the mantel. They never pressured me to talk about the situation at home, but they created a space where I could be myself. Grandpa taught me to play chess, a game that required the kind of strategic thinking I was beginning to need in navigating my home life. Grandma showed me how to cook more complex dishes, saying that a man should know how to feed himself well. "Your father would be so proud of the young man you're becoming," Grandpa told me one evening, as we sat on his porch watching the sunset. He valued independence and integrity above all else. Those words stayed with me, becoming a sort of mantra during the increasingly tense family dinners and uncomfortable weekends at home. I was determined to maintain my independence and integrity, even as I felt like an outsider in my own house. The conflicts with Mom escalated as she pushed me to blend with our new family. Each time I declined a family game night to study or chose to visit my grandparents instead of attending one of Jason's soccer games, disappointment would flash across her face. "They're trying to include you," she would say. "Why can't you meet them halfway?" But from my perspective, I had given up my room, my privacy, my routine, and much of my mother's attention. I had already gone more than halfway. What more could I give? Senior year of high school brought a flurry of college applications, campus tours, and conversations about the future. I had always been a good student, maintaining a GPA above 3.8 despite the turmoil at home. My debate team experience and volunteer work at the local library made me a competitive applicant for several universities. One Sunday afternoon in October, I sat at Grandpa and Grandma's dining room table, a spread of college brochures before us. Grandpa adjusted his reading glasses as he examined the tuition costs listed in each pamphlet. "These numbers keep going up every year," he commented, shaking his head. "Highway robbery, if you ask me." Grandma placed a cup of hot chocolate in front of me, her special recipe with a hint of cinnamon. "Ramiro, we've been wanting to talk to you about your college funding." Something in her tone made me look up from the application I was filling out. Grandpa and Grandma exchanged a meaningful glance before Grandpa cleared his throat. "Your grandmother and I set up a college fund for you the day you were born," he began. "Your father was the first in our family to graduate from college, and he was adamant that you would have the same opportunity." Grandma nodded her eyes, misting slightly at the mention of Dad. "We've been contributing to it consistently all these years. Even after your father passed, we made sure to keep it growing." Grandpa pulled out a folder from his desk drawer and placed it on the table. Inside was documentation for a 529 college savings plan in my name, with my grandparents listed as custodians. "There's currently $120,000 in the account," Grandpa explained. "Enough to cover 4 years of tuition, books, and living expenses at most state universities, or a significant portion of costs at a private institution." I stared at the statement in disbelief. The figure seemed enormous to me. A teenager who considered a $50 birthday check substantial. "You did this for me?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. Grandma squeezed my hand. "Of course we did. You're our grandson, our legacy. Your education was always a priority for your father, and therefore for us." Tears welled in my eyes as the magnitude of their generosity sank in. In a world where I often felt forgotten or sidelined, here was tangible proof that I mattered deeply to someone. "I don't know what to say," I managed. "You don't need to say anything," Grandpa replied. "Just use it wisely. Study something that challenges and fulfills you." 2 months later, I received an acceptance letter from my top choice university, along with a partial merit scholarship that would cover about 20% of the tuition. When I shared the news with Grandpa and Grandma, they insisted on taking me out to celebrate at my favorite steakhouse. The atmosphere at home was less enthusiastic. Mom congratulated me with a quick hug before returning to helping Jason with his science project. Keith nodded approvingly, but immediately followed up with questions about costs. "Those private universities charge an arm and a leg," he remarked. "How are you planning to pay for it?" I hesitated before answering, not sure how much to reveal. "I got a partial scholarship, and Grandpa and Grandma have been saving for my education." Keith's eyebrows shot up. "Oh, that's generous of them. How much have they set aside?" The directness of his question made me uncomfortable, but I saw no reason to be evasive. "They started a college fund when I was born. There's enough to cover my undergraduate degree." That evening, Mom came into my room after Keith and the kids had gone to bed. She sat on the edge of my bed, something she hadn't done in years. Ramiro, Keith and I have been talking about your college fund, she began, her voice careful. We think it would be fair if you shared some of that money with Ashley and Jason. I blinked, certain I had misheard her. What? The college fund, she repeated. We're a family now, and families share resources. Ashley will be looking at colleges in just a few years, and then Jason after that. Keith hasn't been able to save much for their education since the divorce. I sat up, fully alert now. Mom, that money is specifically for me. Grandpa and Grandma set it up for my education. Her expression hardened slightly. I understand that, but circumstances have changed. We need to think about all the children in this family. It's not fair for you to have a fully funded education while your siblings have nothing. They're not my siblings, I said, the words coming out sharper than I intended. And that money is from Dad's parents for me. Mom's face flushed. This attitude is exactly the problem, Ramiro. It's been 3 years, and you still refuse to accept Keith, Ashley, and Jason as your family. That's not true, I protested. I've accepted that they're part of your life now. But that doesn't mean I have to give them money that was set aside for me before they were ever in the picture. We're not asking for all of it, Mom said, her voice rising. Just a third for each of them. That's fair. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. 2/3 of my college fund would be gone just like that. My future, my opportunities, significantly diminished to benefit kids I barely knew. No, I said firmly. I'm not sharing the college fund. It's mine. Mom stood up, disappointment evident in every line of her body. Think about it, Ramiro. Think about what your father would want you to do. That last comment stung more than anything else. Dad would never have expected me to give away my education funding to virtual strangers. He had worked hard to ensure my future, and so had his parents. The next day, I called Grandpa and explained the situation. His response was immediate and unequivocal. That money is yours, Ramiro, he said, his voice firm. Your grandmother and I set it up specifically for you, our only grandchild. No one has the right to ask you to share it, not even your mother. Grandma got on the extension. Honey, we love you, and we established that fund with the explicit purpose of funding your education. It's legally designated for you, and only you can access it when you turn 18. Their unwavering support bolstered my resolve. I wasn't being selfish. I was protecting what was rightfully mine, what had been designated for me by people who loved me. But as I hung up the phone, I knew the battle at home was far from over. The tension in the house was palpable that evening, with Mom and Keith exchanging meaningful glances across the dinner table. Ashley and Jason seemed oblivious to the undercurrents, but I could feel a storm brewing. I was right. This was just the beginning of a conflict that would ultimately tear apart what remained of my relationship with my mother. The next few weeks at home felt like navigating a minefield. Mom and Keith had clearly discussed my refusal at length, and their strategy seemed to be a combination of guilt trips and cold shoulders. I just don't understand how you can be so selfish, Mom said one morning, as I poured myself a bowl of cereal. We've provided everything for you all these years. I bit back the retort that it was Dad and his life insurance that had provided for me for much of that time, not Keith. Instead, I focused on eating quickly so I could leave for school. Keith was less subtle in his approach. When I was your age, I worked 2 jobs to put myself through community college, he announced at dinner one night, unprompted. Nothing was handed to me on a silver platter. I learned the value of sharing and hard work. The implication was clear. I was spoiled and entitled. The fact that my college fund came from my grandparents' decades of careful saving, not some windfall lottery win, seemed irrelevant to them. Ashley and Jason began to pick up on the tension, adopting their parents' attitudes toward me. Ashley would make snide comments about trust fund kids when I was within earshot. Jason, who had once at least been civil as a roommate, now treated me with open hostility, moving my things without permission, and playing his video games at full volume when I was trying to study. One evening, I overheard Keith and Mom talking in the kitchen when they thought I wasn't home. His attitude is getting worse, Keith was saying. He needs to understand that being part of this family means contributing. I know, Mom sighed. I don't recognize him anymore. Ever since Robert and Elaine told him about that money, he's become so entitled. They've always undermined our parenting, Keith replied. filling his head with ideas about what his father would have wanted, spoiling him with that college fund. No wonder he doesn't respect our family unit. I slipped back out the front door, pretending to return home moments later, with a deliberate slam of the door to announce my presence. The conversation immediately ceased, but the damage was done. They viewed my grandparents as adversaries, in some twisted family power struggle, not as the loving, supportive presence they truly were. That night, I called Grandpa again, this time from the privacy of the backyard. They're making me feel like I'm committing some terrible crime by not giving away 2/3 of my college fund, I explained, keeping my voice low. Mom even implied that Dad would be disappointed in me. Grandpa's voice was calm but steely. Your father would be proud of you for standing your ground, Ramiro. He worked hard to provide for your future, and he would expect us to honor that commitment. What should I do? I asked, feeling the weight of the conflict crushing me. It's getting unbearable at home. Focus on finishing your senior year strong, he advised. You're only a few months away from graduation, then you'll be off to college, and this will all be behind you. But Grandpa's optimistic timeline proved unrealistic. The tension at home escalated rapidly. Mom and Keith began excluding me from family decisions and outings. Dinner conversations would pointedly revolve around topics that excluded me, or worse, circled back to the importance of family contributions and equal treatment of all children. My 18th birthday came and went, with minimal acknowledgement from Mom and Keith. A card with no personal message and a $20 gift card to a fast food restaurant was all I received from them. Grandpa and Grandma, meanwhile, took me out for a special dinner and gave me a laptop for college, wrapped with a card that made me tear up with its heartfelt message about how proud they were of the man I was becoming. The contrast couldn't have been more stark, and I think it fueled Mom and Keith's resentment even further. The Cold War at home continued into spring. I focused on maintaining my grades and finalizing my college preparations. I had been accepted to my dream school with a partial scholarship, and thanks to my grandparents' foresight, I would be able to attend without crippling debt. One particularly tense evening, Keith confronted me directly as I was working on scholarship applications at the kitchen table. You know, if you insist on hoarding all that money for yourself, you shouldn't expect us to contribute anything toward your college expenses, he said, his voice cold. No care packages, no spending money, no flights home for holidays. I looked up from my laptop. I never asked you for any of that. Good, because you won't be getting it, he snapped. Actions have consequences, Ramiro. Remember that. Mom, who had been listening from the doorway, didn't contradict him or come to my defense. Her silence was a confirmation that she agreed with his stance. The final months of high school should have been a joyous time filled with senior activities and anticipation for the future. Instead, I moved through them like a ghost disconnected from the life I was supposedly living. At school, I maintained a facade of normalcy, participating in classes and activities. At home, I retreated to my shared bedroom or escaped to my grandparents' house whenever possible. Grandma noticed the toll it was taking on me. You've lost weight, she observed one Sunday, as I picked at her homemade lasagna, usually my favorite, and those circles under your eyes worry me. I'm not sleeping well, I admitted. It's hard to relax when you feel unwelcome in your own home. Grandpa and Grandma exchanged one of their looks, the kind that suggested they were having an entire conversation without words. You know you always have a place with us, Grandpa said finally. If things get too difficult at your mother's house? I appreciated the offer, but was reluctant to escalate the situation further. Moving out seemed like a nuclear option, one that would permanently damage my relationship with Mom. Despite everything I still hoped for, reconciliation still believed that she would eventually come to her senses and remember that I was her son, not just a resource to be divided among her new family. But as graduation approached, and the deadline for my college housing deposit loomed, the pressure from Mom and Keith intensified. They began suggesting that if I wouldn't share the college fund, perhaps I should at least pay rent for the months I would still be living at home before college started. Adults contribute to household expenses, Keith said matter-of-factly. And since you're 18 now, and sitting on a pile of money, it's time you learned that lesson. It was becoming increasingly clear that they viewed me not as a family member, but as a tenant, and an unwelcome one at that. The home where I had grown up, where I had memories of Dad, was no longer my home at all. The breaking point came exactly 1 month before I was scheduled to move into my college dorm. I had just returned from a campus orientation weekend, excited about the classes I had registered for and the roommate I had been matched with. For the first time in months, I felt genuinely optimistic about the future. Mom and Keith were waiting for me in the living room. When I arrived home, their expressions serious. Ashley and Jason were nowhere to be seen, which immediately put me on alert. "Sit down, Ramiro." Keith said, gesturing to the chair across from them. "We need to have a serious conversation." I sat, my backpack still on my shoulders, already anticipating what was coming. "We've been patient," Mom began, her voice strained. "We've given you time to reconsider your position on the college fund, but you've remained obstinate." "I've explained my reasons," I replied, trying to keep my voice level. "That money was set aside specifically for my education by Dad's parents." Keith leaned forward, his face flushed with anger. "Your grandparents have no concept of what it means to raise 3 teenagers in today's economy. They're living in the past, and they've poisoned you against your own family." "They haven't poisoned me against anyone," I protested. "They've supported me when I needed it most." "Unlike your mother," Keith's voice rose. "The woman who has clothed you, fed you, and kept a roof over your head all these years." Mom placed a hand on Keith's arm, a gesture meant to calm him, but her own expression was equally hard. "We've come to a decision, Ramiro. Either you agree to share the college fund equally with Ashley and Jason, or you need to find somewhere else to live." The ultimatum hung in the air between us. Though I had sensed it coming, hearing it stated so baldly still felt like a physical blow. "You're kicking me out?" I asked, my voice barely audible. "Over money that isn't even yours to begin with." "We're asking you to be part of this family," Mom countered. "To share with your siblings as any brother would." "They're not my siblings," I finally exploded, years of bottled frustration pouring out. "They're your husband's kids, who I barely know, and who have shown me nothing but contempt since they moved in. And you've let it happen. You've chosen them over me at every turn." Mom's face paled. "That's not true. I've tried to build a new family for all of us, but you've resisted from day one." "Because it meant erasing Dad," I said, the words catching in my throat. "It meant pretending he never existed, that the life we had before wasn't real." "No one is erasing your father," Mom said, but her eyes wouldn't meet mine. "Really?" I challenged. "When was the last time you mentioned his name? When was the last time you acknowledged his parents, who have done more for me in the past 3 years than you have?" Keith stood up abruptly. "That's enough. Your mother has bent over backward trying to include you, and this is how you repay her, with ingratitude and selfishness." "Keith, please," Mom said, but without much conviction. "No, Diane, he needs to hear this," Keith continued. "He sits there in judgment of us hoarding money that could help all 3 kids, acting like he's the only one who matters. He doesn't deserve our support." I felt a strange calm settle over me, the kind that comes when a situation has deteriorated beyond salvation. "So, that's it? I either give up 2/3 of my college fund, or I'm homeless." Mom looked pained, but resolute. "We're asking you to be fair, Ramiro, to consider what your father would want." That was the final straw. "Don't you dare tell me what Dad would want," I said, my voice deadly quiet. "Dad would be ashamed of how quickly you replaced him, how easily you discarded his memory, and how completely you've abandoned his only child." Mom recoiled as if I'd slapped her. "Your father would be disappointed in the selfish young man you've become," she shot back, tears in her eyes. "He would want you to be generous to help your family." "My family?" I laughed bitterly. "My family is dead or living across town. This," I gestured around the room, "is just the place where I keep my stuff. And apparently, not for much longer." Keith's face was thunderous. "You have 1 week to decide. Either you agree to split the fund, or you find somewhere else to live." I stood up, surprisingly steady despite the earthquake happening in my life. "I don't need a week. I'm not giving away my future to people who have never cared about me. I'll be gone by tomorrow." I turned and walked to my room, ignoring Mom's tearful call of my name. With mechanical precision, I began packing my belongings, separating what was essential from what could be left behind. Clothes, books, my laptop, and the few mementos of Dad that I had kept in my room went into suitcases and boxes. Posters, old toys, and accumulated junk stayed. As I packed, tears streamed down my face, but I made no sound. The betrayal cut too deep for sobs or wails. This was my mother, The woman who had once promised to always protect me, now choosing her new husband and his children over her own son. I called Grandpa, struggling to keep my voice steady as I explained what had happened. "We'll be there in 30 minutes, he said without hesitation. "Pack what you need. The rest we can get later or replace." True to his word, Grandpa's car pulled into our driveway half an hour later. He and Grandma came to the door together, their faces grim but determined. Mom answered, her eyes red and swollen. "Robert, Elaine, this isn't necessary. Ramiro and I just need time to work through this." Grandpa's voice was colder than I had ever heard it. "Time won't fix what you've done, Diane. We're here for Ramiro." Grandma hugged me as soon as she saw me, her small frame somehow enveloping me completely. "It's going to be all right," she whispered fiercely. "We've got you." Keith appeared in the hallway, his presence filling the space with tension. "This is a family matter," he began, but Grandpa cut him off. "Exactly," he said. "And we are Ramiro's family. We're taking him home with us where he belongs." We loaded my belongings into Grandpa's car in silence. I was acutely aware of the neighbors watching from behind curtains, of Ashley and Jason peering from an upstairs window. The shame and pain of being rejected by my own mother threatened to overwhelm me, but I forced myself to keep moving to focus on the task at hand. As we prepared to leave, Mom came out to the driveway, tears streaming down her face. "Ramiro, please," she begged. "Don't leave like this. We can talk more." I looked at her, this woman, who had once been the center of my world, now a stranger to me. "There's nothing left to say," I replied, my voice hollow. "You've made your choice. Now I'm making mine." The drive to my grandparents' house was silent, each of us lost in our own thoughts. I watched through the rear window as my childhood home receded in the distance, wondering if I would ever return, if this rupture could ever be healed. As we pulled into my grandparents' driveway, Grandma turned to look at me from the front seat. "This is your home now, Ramiro," she said firmly, "for as long as you need it to be." In that moment, homeless and heartbroken, I felt a profound gratitude for these two people who had never wavered in their love and support. They couldn't replace what I had lost, but they offered something equally valuable: unconditional acceptance and a safe harbor in the storm. I nodded, unable to speak around the lump in my throat. Then I got out of the car and began unloading my possessions, the physical remnants of a life that no longer existed. Everything had changed in the span of a few hours, and I had no idea what would come next. The guest bedroom at my grandparents' house quickly became my sanctuary. Unlike the shared space at Mom's house, this room was entirely mine, decorated with family photos and a quilt Grandma had made years ago. The quiet respect for my privacy and independence was a stark contrast to the constant scrutiny and judgment I had endured for the past 3 years. Grandpa and Grandma never once questioned my decision to stand firm about the college fund. Instead, they focused on helping me prepare for the next chapter of my life. Grandpa took me shopping for dorm essentials, while Grandma taught me practical skills like doing laundry and cooking simple meals. "College is about more than just academics," Grandma explained, as she showed me how to properly iron a dress shirt. "It's about learning to take care of yourself." A week after I moved in with my grandparents, Grandpa sat me down in his study, a room lined with law books from his days as a practicing attorney. Though retired for 5 years, he still maintained his license and kept up with legal developments out of personal interest. "I've been reviewing the documentation for your college fund," he said, placing a folder on the desk between us. "I wanted to make sure everything was in order given the current situation." He explained that the 529 plan had been established with him and Grandma as custodians, with me as the beneficiary. The funds could only be used for qualified educational expenses, and legally, neither Mom nor Keith had any claim to the money. "Your mother was never a custodian or contributor to this account," Grandpa clarified. "This was a gift from your grandmother and me to you, our only grandchild." The confirmation that my college fund was legally protected brought immense relief. I had stood my ground on principle, but knowing the law was also on my side made me feel more secure in my decision. Grandpa decided to call Mom directly to explain the legal situation, hoping a clear understanding of the facts might diffuse the conflict. I sat nervously in the kitchen with Grandma as he made the call from his study, the door ajar, so we could hear his side of the conversation. "Diane, this is Robert." His voice was formal, but not unkind. "I'm calling to discuss Ramiro's college fund. Yes, he's staying with us now. I understand you're upset, but there are some legal facts you need to be aware of. He explained the structure of the 529 plan, emphasizing that it had been established specifically for my education and could not legally be divided among other beneficiaries without potential tax penalties and legal complications. This isn't about taking sides, Diane, he said, his voice softening slightly. This is about honoring Michael's wishes for his son's education. You know how important that was to him. There was a long pause, as Mom apparently responded. Grandpa's expression grew more troubled. I'm sorry you feel that way, he finally said. But the decision is Ramiro's to make, and we support him. No, this isn't about punishing you or favoring Ramiro. This is about respecting a legal arrangement that was made long before any of these current circumstances. Yes, I understand. Goodbye, Diane. When he emerged from the study, his face was grim. Your mother is still convinced that sharing the fund would be the right thing to do. She believes we're encouraging you to be selfish. Grandma shook her head sadly. She's so focused on her new family that she's lost sight of her responsibilities to her son. The weeks passed, and soon it was time for me to move into my college dorm. Grandpa and Grandma drove me to campus, helped me unpack, and took me out for a celebratory dinner before saying goodbye. As they hugged me in front of my residence hall, Grandma pressed an envelope into my hand. A little extra spending money, she whispered. College should have some fun too, not just studying. I threw myself into university life with a determination born of necessity. My roommate Lucas was a computer science major from Seattle with an easy laugh and a collection of vintage video games. We got along well from the start, our different backgrounds giving us plenty to talk about during late-night study breaks. I joined the debate team, finding comfort in the familiar structure of arguments and rebuttals. I also secured a part-time job at the university library shelving books for 15 hours a week. The extra income wasn't strictly necessary thanks to my college fund. But I wanted to build my resume and have spending money that I had earned myself. My first semester grades were excellent, with straight as in all my classes. I sent a copy of my transcript to Grandpa and Grandma, who responded with a care package full of homemade cookies and a card expressing their pride in my achievements. Through all of this, I had no contact with Mom. The silence between us stretched from weeks into months, a gaping wound that I tried not to probe too often. Sometimes late at night, I would scroll through old photos on my phone, remembering happier times before Dad died, before Keith and his children entered our lives, before money and loyalty became battlegrounds. Then, just before Thanksgiving break, I received a text message from Mom. How are you? How's school going? Simple questions, innocuous on the surface, but loaded with unspoken tension. I waited a full day before responding, unsure of what to say or how much to share. I'm doing well. Classes are good. I made the dean's list. Her reply came quickly. That's wonderful, Ramiro. I'm so proud of you. The conversation continued sporadically over the next few days, carefully neutral topics like the weather and my classes. There was no mention of Keith or Ashley or Jason, no reference to the conflict that had driven us apart. It was as if we were tiptoeing around a sleeping beast, afraid that acknowledging it might wake it up and set it loose again. I went to Grandpa and Grandma's for Thanksgiving, helping Grandma prepare the traditional feast while Grandpa watched football in the living room. It was a quiet celebration, just the three of us, but filled with genuine warmth and gratitude. As we were clearing the dishes, Grandpa mentioned casually, I ran into Bill Stevens at the hardware store yesterday. He mentioned that Keith lost his job at the investment firm. I paused, a stack of plates in my hands. When did that happen? About a month ago, apparently. The company downsized, and Keith was part of the cut. The news explained Mom's sudden attempt to reconnect. With Keith unemployed, the financial pressure on their household must be intense. I felt a mixture of emotions, concern for Mom's satisfaction, that Keith was facing consequences, petty as that might be, and wariness about where this might lead. Sure enough, Mom's texts became more frequent after Thanksgiving, gradually shifting from casual check-ins to hints about their financial situation. Keith is still job hunting. It's a tough market right now. Ashley needs braces. Insurance only covers part of it. The water heater broke. Another unexpected expense. I responded with sympathy, but offered no financial assistance. I suspected these comments were leading somewhere, And my suspicions were confirmed when Mom called me directly one evening in early December. Ramiro. Her voice was tentative. I know things have been difficult between us, but I was hoping we could talk about how to move forward as a family. What did you have in mind? I asked, my guard immediately up. Well, with Keith between jobs, we're struggling a bit financially. I was wondering if you might reconsider helping with Ashley and Jason's future education. Not the whole amount we discussed before, but maybe just a small portion to start college funds for them. And there it was. Not even 6 months after kicking me out, she was asking for money again. The audacity was breathtaking. Mom, I said, keeping my voice, even nothing has changed. That money is for my education as Grandpa and Grandma intended. I'm not in a position to share it. But you have more than you need, she pressed. With your scholarship and your library job, surely there's some excess you could spare. There is no excess, I replied firmly. College is expensive. Books, housing, meals, it all adds up. And I need to budget for 4 years, potentially more, if I decide to pursue graduate school. The conversation ended shortly after, with Mom clearly disappointed, but not pushing further. I sat on my dorm bed afterward, feeling drained and sad. What had happened to the mother who had once put my needs first? Had she always been this person, and I just hadn't seen it? Or had Keith's influence truly changed her so fundamentally? Winter break approached, and I made plans to stay at Grandpa and Grandma's house for the 3-week vacation. The night before I was set to leave campus, Grandpa called with disturbing news. Your mother and Keith are 3 months behind on their mortgage, he said without preamble. A friend at the bank mentioned it to me in confidence. They're at risk of foreclosure if they don't catch up soon. The house in question was the one I had grown up in, the one with Dad's handprints in the concrete of the back patio. The one with my height markers penciled on the kitchen doorframe. The thought of it being taken by the bank created a knot of anxiety in my stomach despite everything that had happened. Do they know that you know? I asked. No, Grandpa replied. And I'm not planning to tell them. I just thought you should be aware of the situation. When I arrived at Grandpa and Grandma's house the next day, we had a long discussion about Mom and Keith's financial troubles. Grandma was concerned, but practical. It's not your responsibility to solve their financial problems, Ramiro, she said gently, especially not at the expense of your own future. Grandpa nodded in agreement. They made their choices both in how they treated you and in their financial management. Actions have consequences, as Keith himself was so fond of saying. But even as I nodded along with their rational assessment, a part of me couldn't help but worry. Despite everything, Mom was still my mother. The house was still the place where I had grown up with Dad. Could I really stand by and watch it all disappear? The conflict between my head and my heart created a constant background tension as I tried to enjoy the holiday break. I helped Grandma decorate the Christmas tree, went ice skating with friends from high school, and worked on assignments for the upcoming semester. But thoughts of Mom and the house kept intruding, especially at night when the house was quiet and my defenses were down. On Christmas Eve, Mom texted me a simple message, "Merry Christmas, Ramiro. I miss you." Those 5 words cracked something inside me. I spent Christmas Day with Grandpa and Grandma opening presents and enjoying Grandma's traditional ham dinner, but my thoughts kept drifting to the other house across town, where another Christmas celebration was happening without me. As the new year approached, I found myself at a crossroads. The anger and hurt that had sustained me through the fall semester were giving way to a more complex array of emotions. I still believed I had made the right decision about the college fund, but I was beginning to wonder if there might be a way forward that didn't involve permanent estrangement from my mother. I just didn't know what that path might look like, or if Mom was even interested in finding it with me. The winter break gave me time to reflect on everything that had happened over the past 6 months. As I sat in Grandpa and Grandma's cozy living room, watching the snow fall outside, I realized I needed to make a decision about my relationship with Mom. The current limbo, neither fully estranged nor reconciled, was taking an emotional toll on all of us. One evening, I asked Grandpa and Grandma to sit down with me in the kitchen. Grandma made hot chocolate, and we gathered around the table where I had eaten countless meals over the years. I've been thinking about Mom and Keith's financial situation, I began, and about the house. Grandpa's expression was cautious. What's on your mind, Ramiro? I don't want to give them money directly, I explained. I'm still firm on that. The college fund stays intact for my education as you intended. They both nodded, visibly relieved. But I hate the thought of losing the house, where Dad and I built that tree house, where we celebrated birthdays and Christmases. There are too many memories there. Grandma reached across the table and squeezed my hand. That's understandable, honey. Those memories are precious. What if I said slowly, thinking it through as I spoke, instead of giving them money, we help them, help themselves. Grandpa, you mentioned that Keith is struggling to find work. What if you used your connections to help him find a job? Grandpa stroked his chin thoughtfully. I do know people in several industries. It wouldn't be difficult to put out some feelers. It would be a way to help, without directly enabling their behavior, I continued. And it might start to rebuild some bridges. We discussed the idea at length. Grandpa had reservations about helping Keith after how he had treated me, but he also understood my desire to preserve some connection with Mom and the family home. I'll make some calls, he finally agreed. No promises, but I'll see what opportunities might be available. The next step was more difficult. I needed to communicate directly with Mom about everything that had happened. After several drafts and revisions, I wrote her a long email pouring out all the hurt, anger, and confusion of the past years. I explained how it felt to be gradually sidelined in my own home, to see her prioritize Keith and his children, and ultimately to be given an ultimatum over money that was never hers to begin with. I understand that you wanted to create a new family after Dad died, I wrote. But it felt like you were trying to erase the old one to erase me. I needed you to be my mom, to put me first sometimes, to remember that I was grieving too. Instead, I felt like an inconvenience, a reminder of a past you wanted to forget. I ended the email by explaining that while I couldn't share the college fund, I was asking Grandpa to help Keith find employment. Not because I owe it to you or him, I clarified, but because despite everything you're still my mother, and I don't want to close the door on our relationship forever. Hitting send on that email was one of the hardest things I've ever done. I had exposed my most vulnerable feelings, my deepest hurts. Now all I could do was wait for a response. Meanwhile, Grandpa was true to his word. He contacted several former colleagues and business associates, inquiring about opportunities for someone with Keith's background in financial advising. Within 2 weeks, he had arranged an interview for Keith with a corporate financial services firm in the city, a position that actually offered better compensation and benefits than his previous job. Mom's response to my email came nearly a week after I sent it. I was back at college by then, settling into my second semester classes. My hands shook as I opened her message. Dear Ramiro, she began. I've read your email multiple times, and each time it breaks my heart in a different way. You're right about so many things. I did get caught up in building a new life with Keith, in trying to make Ashley and Jason feel welcome and loved. But in doing so, I failed to see how it was affecting you, my own son. She went on to acknowledge specific instances where she had prioritized Keith and his children over me, moments that I hadn't even mentioned in my email, but that had clearly stuck with her as well. The truth is, I was scared, she admitted. After your father died, I was terrified of being alone, of raising you by myself. Keith represented security and stability, a ready-made family to fill the emptiness. I convinced myself that what was good for me would automatically be good for you too. I was wrong, and I'm so deeply sorry. Regarding the college fund, she wrote, your grandparents created that fund for you, and I had no right to demand that you share it. My insistence came from a place of trying to prove to Keith that you were fully part of our new family, that I wasn't favoring you over his children. But in trying to force equality, I created terrible inequality, treating you worse than I would ever have allowed anyone else to treat you. She ended with a request to meet in person when I came home for spring break to begin the process of rebuilding our relationship. I don't expect forgiveness right away, or maybe ever, she wrote. But I hope you'll give me the chance to try to earn back your trust, however long that takes. I read the email through tears, feeling a complex mixture of vindication, relief, and cautious hope. It wasn't a magical fix for all that had happened, but it was a start, an acknowledgement of the harm done, and a desire to move forward differently. Over the next several weeks, Mom and I exchanged occasional texts and emails, rebuilding our communication one small step at a time. I learned that Keith had gotten the job Grandpa helped arrange and had started 2 weeks ago. They were working to catch up on their mortgage payments and other bills. When spring break arrived, I met Mom at a coffee shop halfway between Grandpa and Grandma's house and my old home. It was neutral territory, a place where we could talk without the weight of too many memories or the presence of Keith and his children. She looked older than I remembered, with new lines around her eyes and mouth. When she saw me, her face lit up briefly before settling into a nervous expression. "Thank you for meeting me," she said, as we sat down with our drinks. "Thank you for the email," I replied. "It meant a lot to hear you acknowledge what happened." We talked for nearly 3 hours, working through years of misunderstandings, hurt feelings, and broken trust. There were tears on both sides, moments of tension, but also glimpses of the close relationship we had once shared. "I don't expect things to go back to how they were before," Mom said toward the end of our conversation. "Too much has happened. But I want to build something new with you, Ramiro. Something based on respect and understanding this time." I'd like that I said and meant it. We agreed to continue meeting regularly, just the two of us, without Keith or his children present. It would take time to rebuild our relationship, and even longer, before I would be comfortable around the rest of her family again. But it was a beginning. As for the college fund, it remained untouched and dedicated solely to my education as my grandparents had intended. Mom never brought up sharing it again, and in fact made a point of telling me that she and Keith were now setting aside small monthly amounts for Ashley and Jason's future education. I continued living with Grandpa and Grandma throughout my freshman year of college, returning to their home during breaks and weekends when I needed a quiet place to study. Their unwavering support had been my anchor during the storm, and I would forever be grateful for their love and guidance. My academic success continued, and I maintained my position on the dean's list. The part-time job at the library evolved into a research assistantship with one of my professors, providing valuable experience and an additional line on my resume. Looking back on everything that happened, I can see now that standing my ground about the college fund wasn't just about the money itself. It was about asserting my worth in a situation where I felt increasingly devalued and forgotten. It was about honoring my grandparents' generosity and my father's memory. It was about securing my future when those who should have been protecting it were instead trying to divide it among others. The experience taught me several profound lessons. First, that family isn't always defined by blood or legal ties. My grandparents demonstrated more unconditional love and support than my own mother during that difficult time. They showed me what it means to stand by someone through their darkest moments. Second, I learned that sometimes you have to endure short-term discomfort to protect your long-term well-being. Being kicked out of my home was painful and traumatic, but it led to a healthier living situation and ultimately forced a necessary confrontation with the underlying issues in my relationship with Mom. Third, I discovered my own resilience. I survived being rejected by my mother, adapted to a new living situation, excelled in my first year of college, and began the difficult process of rebuilding a damaged relationship. Through it all, I maintained my integrity and stayed true to my principles. My relationship with Mom continues to evolve. We're not as close as we once were, and I doubt we ever will be again. There are still moments of tension, especially when Keith or his children are involved. But we're finding our way toward a new normal one based on honesty and mutual respect rather than obligation or guilt. As for the future, I'm focused on completing my degree, building a career, and eventually creating a family of my own someday, one where every member feels valued and secure. The college fund that caused so much conflict will help make that future possible, just as my grandparents intended when they established it on the day I was born. Sometimes the family you choose supports you more than the family you're born into. And sometimes standing your ground doesn't just secure your future, it teaches others how to truly value you. Have you ever had to stand your ground against family pressure? What would you have done in my situation? Let me know in the comments below. If this story resonated with you, please hit the like button and subscribe to hear more real-life experiences. Thank you for listening to my journey, and remember, protecting your future isn't selfish, it's necessary. Share this video if you know someone who needs to hear that message today.